Okay, let me ask the audience, and then I will actually ask one of the Twitter questions that I've gotten. Yes, and do me a favor, just say your name. Right? And turn around so that
Vicky,
people can
I
see
think
you in the camera.
up here.
Right here, Vicki. And then one question back there and one question on Twitter.
I'm Jerome Dantas. I'm a retired professor of mathematics from the University of Maryland. And I guess I'm concerned that the teacher evaluations is putting an undue onus on the teachers, and it's completely letting the textbooks off the hook and the administrators off the hook. I'd like to give you a quote from U.S. Secretary of Education, Annie Duncan. It's hard to teach what you don't know, and when you get to middle school, we see a lot of students begin to lose interest in math and science. It's because their teachers don't know the math and the science. Well, the obvious, now...
So do me a favor, because
right,
just get to a question.
Well, at the end. I'll be quickly.
Because we
But,
are running out
you
of
know,
time.
unfortunately, when he put out the rules for Race to the Top, he didn't say that states that would raise the licensing requirements so that the teachers would actually know the content, that those states would get points. And he didn't say that states which would provide professional development in content so that those who don't know the content would then know the content, that those states would get points. And so I'm suggesting that the teacher evaluation is a distraction from having professional development and licensing, so that all the teachers will know the content, and not just many of them. And do you agree? Question: do you agree?
I would just say the Finns would agree with you. Because that's what they focus on.
Okay, next question. Back there. And then I'm going to ask one of these questions from Laura Coscarelli.
David Cohen from the Department for Professional Employees, AFL-CIO. Professor Darling-Hammond's holistic integrated approach struck me as hauntingly rational, which is anything that strikes me that way seems to me likely to be doomed from the start. But I would like to ask the other two panelists what problems or objections you see in that holistic integrated approach.
So thanks for asking that, because the funny thing is I often get cast in these kinds of panels as the value-added proponent, where I spent 4 years...
No, the VAG, the value-added guy.
Yeah. Where I spent 4 years of my life trying to improve the other components of a teacher evaluation system. So I spent 4 years going around saying, okay, we have got to make the classroom observations higher quality. Let's test out the measures that we've got. I said, well, gosh, like, are there other things we could do, like student surveys, and would that be informative? And all of the discussions that we've had up here about the downsides to the value-added measures apply equally, and in some cases even more strongly, to the other components of the holistic review, which I support, by the way. So when I said 30 to 50% on achievement gains, I was saying everything else has got to be these other things, but let's make sure they're high quality. I'm most worried, by the way, about the quality of the classroom observations that are being done right now. Not that it's not that I don't think that there are problems, there are issues to be resolved with value added, but I'm even more worried about the classroom observation, which we haven't talked about. And we've got a project going where we're trying to make the classroom observation higher quality and more valuable for teachers. We call it the Best Foot Forward project. there's so many potential advantages to video for an observation, not the least of which is if you're going to sit down and have a holistic conversation with a teacher, reading from your notes from a classroom observation is not going to be the most powerful thing, because for a teacher who's struggling, it's that they haven't noticed something in the class. They haven't noticed that there were some students that got turned off when they responded a certain way to a question. They didn't notice that there were some students in the back of the class absolutely paying no attention. And you cannot get somebody to notice something that they didn't notice by reading your notes. The only way you get somebody to notice something they didn't notice at the time was to show them a video of it. So what we're trying, but I'm not arguing that we stick a video camera in classrooms. What instead, with this Best Foot Forward project idea is, we give teachers the camera. We say, when you have 4 lessons, here are our standards. When you have 4 lessons that you're particularly proud of, you submit them, and we'll train your principal to have a meaningful feedback conversation. I actually think that that would be a dramatic improvement on the quality of classroom observations, but we're going to see whether that's the case, whether by doing that you actually have principals more satisfied, teachers more satisfied, and better student achievement gains. So I totally agree that the holistic approach is the way to go. I think we're underestimating, though, how hard it's going to be to get those other components of the portfolio done well. And I think we're spending too much time worried about the downsides to the value added, which are real, but also apply to all these other parts, which, and maybe even more importantly.
I just sort of agree with Tom on that because, and I acknowledge how much of the work that the MED project did on observations and student surveys is going to be extremely useful. And I think part of our debate has been, well, how do you put them together and weight them? And I've articulated a view that in the student learning component, there ought to be more than one measure of student learning, whatever that size of that component is, and it ought to be looked at in relation to your teaching. Because the other thing is that if I'm a history teacher and I'm causing the kids to write and do revisions of their research papers, the English teacher may get the credit for that if what happens on the English test doesn't get linked back to the teaching, right? So there's that piece. But the key is then when you do flag, hopefully with multiple measures, a concern or a problem, hopefully with more valid multiple measures, then there should not be a mechanical decision about who can get tenure or who will be dismissed. And that's happened in districts that have just said, we've got this one metric, and usually it's this value-added metric, and that by itself can be the trigger. At that point where you have a concern about a teacher that's reified through these hopefully increasingly valid measures, then you need a process by which, an analysis goes on, feedback gets given, a peer assistance and review program gets put in place where a mentor works with you and you have the chance to improve, and where a serious judgment is made based on that combination of measures that have been vetted and worked with. And I think part of the challenge right now is to move states and districts past what has started in many cases to be a mechanical way of looking at teacher evaluation, sometimes with a metric that is not suitable in all cases, to a way that is more grounded in reliable evidence of various kinds and managed in a professional fashion. And I think Tom and I agree about that.
I'm going to let Doug
So
quickly, and then I'm going to ask the Twitter question.
So I think there's an important distinction to make here, which is the difference between mechanical and multidimensional or multiple measures. Right? You can have and what I'm proposing really in the screening process is something that's mechanical, but that's a little bit more complicated and certainly involves multiple measures. I think the question that I'm not sure how, Linda, how the basket idea fits into this is whether it's just give the information to the principal or the district people and let them make these decisions however they see fit, and how much of it is we're still going to have a very specific concrete process for using the measures, and it's still going to be mechanical in the sense that once you've gone through this process, the decision that comes out at the end is is the decision and not subject to more subjective decision. I think that's the fundamental possible difference here.
So some states, for example, in doing Race to the Top, and I would take Massachusetts as an example, put a matrix approach in place, where they said you must use multiple measures of student learning. And if they all point in a negative direction, you're going to be in this part of the matrix, which is going to give you a flag, right? Or if you know, most of them are uninspiring, and you know, some of them are, you know, obviously at the bottom. But the goal was that within, they're classifying, but by using several measures. And then there's a process, and the process then goes into a peer review and an analysis, and a process by which at the end of a year, you know, if there is an improvement, then you have a personnel decision. I'm not arguing against personnel decisions. In fact, I'm a very strong believer that you've got to have productive ways to identify teachers who are not succeeding, and then help them improve and remove them if they don't improve. And I've seen lots of ways that that can work. I am concerned that some of the metrics we could use would be inaccurate, and that's completely debilitating to teachers like Maria or Carolyn or others who are not anomalies. We know that they exist, and we know what some of the reasons are for the anomalies that the metrics produce.
I think just one quick, I promise quick. I think the concern is that there might still, if in this process there's a point at which it becomes almost completely subjective how the decisions get made, we may kind of go back to where we were, you know, 10 years ago, where we weren't really paying attention, where we weren't doing what you just said you think we should do of getting teachers who are really low performing out the door. And I think the question is whether in that process you have a point at which that can happen, and whether we might go back in that direction.
Well, in the districts that were, I'm sorry.
So let me just say, I think the debate here is basically data informing decisions versus data dictating decision. And I think that's really the debate that's, you know, that's emerging in our space. And, you know, I think that both of you, you know, this is the kind of discussion that we're going to be having for a long time. But that's where I think you're starting to see, does these data points get you to a magic decision for which there's not going to be any subjective change, versus do they just inform that decision? And with Doug basically saying, you know, that there's been, sorry to put words in your mouth, you know, such a distrust of the educators writ large that people have looked at needing to have this data because of that distrust. Let me do the one last question, which was on Twitter, because we are in the 21st century, from Laura Cascarelli, who asked the panel, what is the role of teacher preparation institutions in preparing teaching candidates to be evaluated by value-add measures?
I have an idea.
I thought you would.
We'll let Tom start.
I think, so we know from lots of research that teaching ability is not fixed. It is changeable. It does improve. In fact, we do know that clinical experience matters a lot. How do we know that? Well, we know it because when you look at the value-added student achievement gain measures, and I'm sure it would be true of the other measures as well, but it's been less studied, is that there's improvement from the first to the second to the third year of teaching, and it flattens out. I think the real issue is I don't think we have taken the lessons on the importance of clinical experience and applied it backwards to how we're training teachers and teacher training institutions. And I think if we did, we would see better student outcomes for first-year teachers. Rather than, you know, teaching them the history of education, we ought to be teaching them how to teach.
Well, and indeed, we agree on that, and I think there's some evidence that in places that are doing deep clinical training, teachers who are first-year teachers start at the level that third-year teachers used to start at, you know, and we have some actually some value-added evidence about that. One of the things that will actually improve the quality of learning for kids in the long run is if teachers themselves know how to develop student learning evidence in their classroom and use it to inform their ongoing instruction. So what teacher education institutions should be doing is helping beginning teachers learn about how to measure their, learning in a variety of ways, authentic and rich ways, not just, kind of multiple choice strategies, and look at growth from one unit to the next, from one assessment to the next, and inform their own teaching around that. And so there are places that are doing that, and there are others that need to do more of it. There is a new assessment that we've worked on in California that was based on the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards portfolio, where you do have to track student learning gains for students in the portfolio. And it requires, as part of licensing, that you have to plan a curriculum, teach it, be videotaped, and measure student learning for that curriculum in that unit. And that's all scored, but the teachers have to learn in the course of doing it how to structure assessments and evaluate student learning. And if they learn that, and if we have a process in schools that is not just metrics produced from outside, but also metrics produced from inside the classroom about student learning, what will happen is we won't have teachers who are saying, I teach the same notes I taught every class period for the last 20 years, but they're saying, what did my kids learn? How do I adjust my instruction? How do I enable more of them to learn more effectively? And I think we can get a lot of traction on that in pre-service.
You got the last word, Doug, if you want.
So, yeah, no, I'll say a little bit. I'm not sure that we've given, that the value-added debate itself has produced a lot of useful evidence yet for schools of education. I think we're building towards that, being able to provide more concrete advice about the specific things that are associated with value-added. I think there is a concern about this movement towards evaluating the schools of education with value-added, which hasn't really come up just yet, which is also happening. I think, especially in some schools just don't attract the strongest, academically strongest students, right? And so one thing that seems to show up in the literature, it's not a really tight relationship, but that people who have stronger academic skills are going to be better teachers on the average. So I think part of the concern is thinking about what it is we're evaluating the schools of education on. Are we evaluating them on who they attract and who they're able to recruit and get into these programs, which we might want to evaluate them on, right? We might want to make that part of what they have to do. Or are we evaluating them how much kind of value they add literally to the students they're able to attract? So I think there's a lot involved in that. I think that debate's going to be ongoing. But I think as researchers, we also have to be providing some more guidance to them about what they should be doing. And I think a lot of the suggestions that have been made are things we probably knew before the value-added debate. It was not like we learned that recently, that we should be teaching teachers how to teach and be focusing on instruction and classroom management and things like this.
So I want to thank the panel for a really wonderful presentation and an even more wonderful discussion after the presentation. And I want to thank everyone for coming and participating in it. And this ends our panel today.
Randy,
Leo.
if I could add.
Sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to add one last thank you. Randy gave credit to the staff of the Schenker Institute, but all the staff would tell you that in truth, there's one person, Vicki Thomas, who was at the office till 8 o'clock last night, who made sure this all happened.
Thank you very much, everybody.